Maitha, we're so happy to be here together today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for participating in Portrait of a Nation 2 Beyond Narratives.
Thank you for having me, to be honest.
It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
We've been really, it has been an online experience with so many conversations.
True.
I had at least the pleasure of seeing your work in London. But let's go a little bit rewind, because when you started talking, the first thing you started talking about is the importance of stories in your work.
Well, thank you first for having me. And yeah, I mean, like, stories really have an impact, and it's a very big thing in my work. I have started with stories at a very young age. I remember being interested in stories and making up stories, but also painting. However, like, these two did not come together until later I remember, like, it was my senior project when I had decided to link both stories and the visuals, the paintings that I make, and kind of like just like, you know, put them together. I remember, like, one of my professors was telling me, like, grab into something that, you know, you won't be tired of talking about. Like, you're not going to be tired talking about that subject. What would it be? So I went back and I, like, started looking at, like, the things that I've written, and my love for, like, stories. And that's where I decided to take the characters that are in these stories, in the text, and bring them, like, either in painting or sculptures, or later on I went into, like, performance. So it's the process, and I feel like that's why it comes out very kind of like theatrical. You know what I mean? Because it really comes from a text first. That's where I would write, like, the story, and then, like, pull out the characters and put them in different forms. So yeah.
Let's talk a little bit, these characters, what are these characters? Do they represent, I mean, obviously there's a symbol behind every character that you use.
I mean, yes, I mean, these stories directly come from the texts and the stories that I've written. So, what I write comes from memories and folk tales and things that I've heard as a kid. So these characters were either, like, characters that are totally imaginative, that I had created as a kid, that come from a certain memory and a certain environment and a certain, I would say, scene or part of my life, or characters that had been developed through the stories that were told by my grandmother, or the stories that I've heard as a kid. But I always say, like, these stories when I was a kid, like, these characters were very innocent when I was a kid. But as I grew up, and when I look back at these characters, these characters kind of, like, grabbed something different. You know, as you grow up, you kind of, like, understand the world differently. And there are kind of, like, things that you start to realize. Something that I talk about in my work a lot is the notion of sin and forgiveness. And I usually, like, I have, like, the rooster and the pig as metaphors to that. Now, the rooster being, you know, this animal that sees angel. My grandmother always used to say, because, like, she lived in this house that had, like, a big farm with, you know, as a kid, like, I'd go out and there are, like, roosters and chickens and ducks and sheep. So she would always say, like, when you hear a rooster, there are angels around, so ask God for forgiveness. So I chose the rooster to be a metaphor for forgiveness and for the right, I don't know, the right thing to do. And then on the other hand, there is this common thing that, you know, the pig being this sinful animal, and I use the pig as the notion of sin and wrong. And I always like to put them in conversation together. And there are a lot of metaphors to different animals as well in my work.
How did you transit? Because that was a whole series, and I saw
Yes.
there was a performative part of it.
Yeah.
And then you transitioned into this. And this is part of a recent series that you started working on.
True. It was part of Too Close to the Sun.
Yes.
And for Beyond Emerging Artists at Abu Dhabi Art last year. And this painting actually was had came from that series. It's a recent show, and I did not want to break the thought of I was still there in that storyline that I had already created, and decided to continue with the storyline. Yeah, and this is where the dance and the animal came from.
There's a feeling of transformation that is happening. You know, it's not really a human figure. It's not really an animal figure.
Yeah.
There are some of the, you know, the color tones are. Is it an outdoor scene, an indoor scene?
Yeah, I mean, for Too Close to the Sun, I took. I was looking at folk tales in the region, and I came across this folk tale of a woman called Sila, Sila is a hybrid between a human and creature, human and animal, and Sila had descended to Earth, and then married a human man, had kids. And then suddenly one night she sees lightning in the sky and see that as a sign to return back to her clan and return back to the wild. And that's where she takes off. And then it was said that people started calling women that kind of like go out of the box as Silas, someone that had, you know, went completely out of the box and like kind of like went into the wild and abandoned the life that she knew and abandoned her family. And so I took that story, that folktale, and then there was a very interesting book that I was reading at that time, Women Who Run with the Wolves, by Clarissa Pinkola. And she says something very interesting that kind of like inspired this whole series in the book. She says that, you know, woman possesses this wild nature in them, and she called it wild woman. And she said that it's an endangered species, which was very interesting, like to be, for a woman that is doing it or going out of the box, to be called a wild woman. It's kind of like, you know, a badge. It's not something like I see it as a positive thing. And this is where I had decided to bring these wild animals and these kind of like characters that kind of like look like human figures, female figures, but then kind of like transformed into this wild animal.
So I came, and when I visited you in the studio, there was this painting, and there were others, and you told me that you were expanding on the series. I want to ask you, first of all, this work, how does it fall with the series that you started at Beyond at Emerging Artists?
Yeah, I mean, there are like three elements I would say in this series. One of them is being like these figures that are kind of like human turning into wild animals, and then there is another part where I would show the outdoors and the indoors. Now the indoors, I show it as like this space that is contained and had like very small tiles that are covering the floor, and it kind of like these tiles come from like, you know, they are actually bathroom tiles that I decided to put as an installation for Too Close to the Sun and in some of the paintings in the series. I like this play of the indoor and the outdoor. The indoor being this kind of like contained space where the characters are in, you know, by themselves. It's a safe place, you know. It's a box with, you know, small tiles, and this space kind of like feels kind of like secure, like like feels closed enough, but then there's a window that shows the outdoors, where there's like this kind of like a forest scene going on. And I like this idea of these characters wanting to escape that contained space into the wild and into the outdoors.
And as I said from before, there is a transformation that is taking place. Where do you see this transformation happening? Is it the transition from the indoor to the outdoor, or is it a transition that is transforming, that's happening already inside, that is continuing out?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a transformation that that starts indoors, but then only you see the characters only kind of like within their elements, because they're turning into wild animals, and they are only in their elements once you see them like in the wild, you know, in an outdoor space. However, like the indoor characters kind of show this unsettled feeling, like you see like an unsettled feeling to the characters, or like a very disturbing feeling in the form of these characters. They're kind of like struggling, they're kind of like had just begun this transformation process, but you only see them in their, you know, in their element once the character is outdoors and they are dancing with other characters that are like already turning into wild animals.
There's a lot of energy in your paintings, and what I feel it's probably also the way that you do your technique of painting, because you use your hands, right? You don't.
I do. So I do use my hands. I mean, it's a very exciting process for me, at least. Like the process of thinking and writing takes a lot of my time, and then once I finish that part, the process of just really understanding the characters that I want to put forward, really understanding the story that I want to put forward, and then, you know, I kind of like feel this energy to kind of like create, and that's where I would use my hands. I'm very like, when I'm like working, my fingers, I would use my fingers to kind of like put on the paint and even like mix the paint with my fingers. I mean, I started this process as like, you know, me just not wanting to break out of my thoughts and just like going and grabbing, you know, the brush and like changing brushes. So like I started with it like that, and then it just became something that I'm comfortable with, rather than using, you know, the brush. It's kind of like a transformation of that energy that I've been holding while, you know, in the process of writing or in the process of creating these characters. I like to feel that I'm putting out this energy into the canvas. And it is also, in a way, I see as a performative way to paint, because I almost like feel the energy and like try to put that into the paint and into the canvas or into the wood panel or into the sculptures as well. So yeah, it's a very joyful process for me.
The painting is in dialogue with two other paintings in this exhibition.
True.
By Mohammed al-Mazrou'i. And obviously it was done on purpose. But can you tell me, why do you think it was done on? There's a relationship here. And I love the story that you told me, how you met Mohammed al-Mazrou'i, the relationship that you had together.
True.
And a mentorship that is not particularly linked to a way of painting or transferring expertise or craft, but more.
Yeah, I mean, true. I mean, I met Mohammed al-Mazrou'i when I was very, very young. I was just, you know, graduating from university. He came to my senior project, and we started talking a lot. I started going to his studio, not particularly to see him paint. I actually never seen Mohammed al-Mazrou'i paint, although like we were like really good friends and we would go out. But it was a mentorship in the way of how to think. And I remember like, you know, just graduating from university, being very young, haven't still, you know, I haven't still been into the art scene yet. and he literally introduced me to the art scene. And I remember like the first project that I had with Mohammed al-Mazrou'i was co-curating Noah's Ark.
For the Emirates Fine Arts Society.
With the Emirates
right?
Fine Arts Society, and that was I think in 2015. And me had just like graduated a year ago from Zayed University. It was a very exciting, informative process. I had visited studios of Muhammad Kadhim, Hassan Sharif, Aisha Jum'a, artists that were established in the art scene, and me being this young and going and talking about their work and commissioning their work for the exhibition that we will have in Sharjah. It was the starting point, I would say, for myself. It's very interesting because I don't necessarily go back to that time, but now when I'm back, like it was, the way that me and Mohammed al-Mazrou'i were in conversation all the time, and him introducing me to the art scene and introducing me to the history of arts in the region, who's who and who's doing what. It kind of like just...
It's almost like,
yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say replicating, but it's also the same process that those who experienced the studios of Hassan Sharif did, because this transfer of knowledge, but also he recommended books for you to read.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it was about like him recommending books, him like and just like being around someone that had been in the art scene for so long and understand it so well, and established amazing artists like he was, that works in text, poetry and painting and stories. It was a starting point for me, I would say.
Are you doing the same? Are you transferring this experience to a younger generation?
I mean, yes, I would. I mean, right now, what happens like with me and like the other artists that are in my colleagues, like in the same, in the same field, we're in stage in our practice. We kind of like we're welcoming artists and young artists, fresh graduates to come to our studios. We have fresh graduates that are working as studio assistants in our studios. So yes, why not? I mean, I saw how it did good to my art career, so I'm sure like just being around artists that are working in their studios would be something of an interest to a younger artist, a fresh graduate, let's say, that wants to make it into the art scene. It's very important. It's not about the technique. It's about also the way of how to hold a conversation, and a way of how to put yourself in the art scene, how to kind of create that for yourself, the storyline, the concepts, all of that. So yeah, it is.
You just started with this series. How do you see it evolving, and where do you want to take it?
I mean, for now, what I like to do is just take these characters and play with them as much as I can, put them in different mediums, work with them, and then yeah, I guess it would be like a feeling that I would get when to stop it and when it would end. But right now, I'm enjoying it, and I'm enjoying the process, and I like to keep going with the series, and maybe see what comes out of it, and just like dig into the texts and the stories I've already written, and just like bring them to life, and kind of like play with them and dance with them a little bit before I decide to.
Is the woman always a key protagonist in your work? I mean, it's.
I mean, as a female, as a woman myself, I feel like and because like the work comes from personal, memories, and I always like to portray the figures as females, just because it comes from a personal, I would say like comes from personal diaries and memories. So yeah, why not? I mean, as a female, it is kind of like it represents myself as well.
Your stories,
yeah, it is my stories, and I kind of like to think of it as a self-portrait, let's say, of myself into canvas and into these characters.
Thank you, Maitha.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's such a pleasure.
The pleasure is mine.